Hi everyone, this is Tim, your lecturer instructor for the paramedic to the RN transition program. This is the psych portion of it, and I'm going to be covering this PowerPoint and voiceover, which is on chapter 16, specifically schizophrenia. I followed along with the book pretty well. The PowerPoint itself was actually made by the book company, so I think they do a pretty good job as far as kind of following each other pretty well. So here we go. So schizophrenia, it's distorted and bizarre thoughts, perceptions and emotions. It's also movements and behavior. So people who are schizophrenic, not only is it a mental disability or mental problem, but it also has physiological aspects of it too, whether it be because of the disease process itself or because of the medications that they actually take. So categories of the symptoms is actually found on page 267 in box 16.1. There's positive symptoms, are also known as hard, and there's also negative or soft symptoms. So just a rundown of those. There's ambivalence, which is a positive or hard symptom. It's holding seemingly contradictory beliefs or feelings about the same person, event, and situation. There's associative looseness. It's fragmented or poorly related thoughts and ideas. Delusions, which is fixed false beliefs that have no basis in reality. They also have flight of ideas, which is continuous flow of verbalization in which the person jumps rapidly from one topic to another. I think this is probably a very common symptom that you see with people with schizophrenia. They also have hallucinations, which is a false sensory perception or perceptual experience that do not exist in reality. And they have ideas of reference, false impressions that external events have special meanings for the person. And they also have bizarre behavior, which is outlandish appearance or clothing, repetitive or stereotyped, seemingly purposeless movements, and unusual social or sexual behavior. Negative or soft symptoms. One of them is alegia, which is a tendency to speak very little or to convey little substance or meaning. They have anhundia, which is feeling no joy or pleasure from life or any activity or relationship. They have apathy, feelings of indifference toward people, activities, or events. They have blunt affect, which is restricted range of motion, emotional feeling, tone, or mood. They have catatonia, which is a psychological induced immobility, occasionally marked by periods of agitation or excitement. The client seems motionless as if in a trance. They have flat affect. They also have inattention, which is the inability to concentrate or focus on a topic or activity regardless of its importance. So there's the most common symptoms that you'll probably see, whether it be them being positive and hard symptoms or negative and soft symptoms. Schizophrenia is usually diagnosed in late adolescence or early adulthood. The peak incidence of onset is 15 to 25 years of age for men and 25 to 35 years of age for women. The prevalence is estimated at about 1% of the total population. In the United States, nearly 3 million people are or have been or will be affected by the disease. And schizoaffective disorder is diagnosed when the client has a mixture of psychotic and mood symptoms. One thing that your book had mentioned that I thought was very interesting is that the onset can be between the 15 and 25 years of age, but they also mentioned several times, and I thought this was kind of important, is that that children who are diagnosed with schizophrenia tend to do worse in life than adults. I think that it's more probably with adults, you've kind of lived some sort of normal life and had some sort of support group, whether it be being married and having kids or having families and being able to hold out a job. I mean, the older you are, the more coping mechanisms you probably have. And because of that, it kind of carries into being diagnosed and still having those things to be able to get you through it. Whereas with children, they don't have or have not developed the coping mechanisms or have not developed mature enough to be able to handle this. And I think that it's probably the younger you are, the more it affects your life in a negative kind of way, and it's hard to get out of that. Let's see here. Anything else that I mentioned? No. All right. So, clinical course. Onset, abrupt and insidious, most with slower gradual development of signs and symptoms. So it doesn't just happen overnight. You don't wake up and you're, schizophrenic with all the hard and soft symptoms. It's something that's actually very slow and very gradual. Diagnosis usually with more actively positive symptoms of the psychosis. So again, you're going to have the more of the positive symptoms, and it is probably going to be more of people being aware around you of what was going on and kind of bring it to your attention and being able to see that. Whereas with the negative or the soft symptoms, it's probably more internal, and because you're very quiet and people don't really see a lot of that stuff, no one really kind of says anything. The immediate course has two patterns. There's the ongoing psychosis, never fully recovering, episodes of psychotic symptoms alternating with episodes of relatively complete recovery. So when I was reading this, I believe that people who are schizophrenic were going to always be schizophrenic, but that's really not the case. You can actually be you can live a very long life without it. Something major in your life or major event happens and the symptoms start. But with early interventions and medications, I don't necessarily say it would go away, but you can kind of control it a little bit easier and a little bit faster. Plus, I think the earlier onset as an adult and being able to put on the right medication, it may take a trial and error of putting you on the right one until one actually works. But once you get there, it tends to be better. But they also have long-term course, which is intensity of psychosis diminishes with age, but most with difficulty functioning, few with inability to live fully independent lives. So, I think that once you get on the right medication and what actually works for you, you can live the rest of your life probably as normal as you possibly can. I did write some notes down. So see here, onset, children do worse than adults, immediate psychosis, and zero return or psychosis with return. So again, you either have the psychosis and never get back to normal, or you can have the psychosis and like I said, either you can return back to normal with the right support group and the right medication. They also have long-term course, which is live full lives, or eventually, or a lot of times these people actually live in group homes. I took care of a patient a couple weeks ago who was in ICU. She was there because she was taking a lot of her meds, which was making her pretty drowsy, and she wasn't eating, drinking very well. And then when she was drinking so much that it was actually diluting her sodium down to, I think she was all the way down to like 110. And so by the time I actually had received her as a patient, she was pretty much on her way out of ICU and back onto a med-surg floor. But she was the typical stereotypical schizophrenic patient. She lived in a group home. It was actually court-ordered. It was involuntary. I think it was mostly because not so much that she was a danger to herself or others. It was more of just keeping her in a group home, kept her on her medications, give her some sort of support to be able to stay as healthy and as sane, for lack of better terminology, as much as she possibly can. So there's also related disorders. There's schizophreniform disorders. There's catatonia, delusional disorder, brief psychotic disorder, shared psychotic disorder, and schizotypical personality disorder. And I don't think I actually wrote any notes specifically on that. No, not specifically. Let's see here. I can tell you that on page 268, there's schizophrenia 295.90. That's the diagnosis criteria. I think that's probably a really good need to know type thing for knowing this disorder as far as how it's diagnosed. Yep, I think that's pretty much about it so far. All right, so etiology, biological theories. There's the genetic factor, partial inheritance. I think I might have told you the story before, but I have a friend who has a son who has Asperger's, and his grandfather was schizophrenic. And the older the friend's son who had Asperger's became, the more symptoms he actually started to show of having schizophrenia. And I think at some point either the book had told me or I think I might have read this somewhere that schizophrenia tends to skip a generation. So it would be not impossible that the grandfather would be schizophrenic. The mother of this child was not, even though she was a little odd. But then her son itself, like I said, he was diagnosed at a very young age, probably as a young boy, of having Asperger's. And like I said, by the time he was probably between 25 and 28 is when the symptoms of schizophrenia started to come out. He wasn't necessarily a danger to himself or others, but I think that the symptoms of the almost like the Tourette's-like outbursts, and we called it living in his head. He tended to keep to himself and act out